When the words coming out of your mouth are true and you believe what you're saying, that's authenticity. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of I Am Nineveh. If it's your first time, thank you so much for joining. If you are a longtime listener, thank you as well. Okay, if you're a longtime listener, then you know that there are times when I do this show that I give you a lot of grace, right? There are episodes that just give you that ounce and a pound of grace that you need in your life. And then there are other times when I do episodes that I tend to intensify things because just like with leadership, there are times that you push people to get the greatness out of them. And there are other times that you read them to understand whether they need more grace. And so you pull the pressure off or you back off. And so the same thing with you guys, my listeners, the audience, it's a relationship that we have together. And so it ebbs and flows in terms of how I show up. Am I showing up this week to give you a dose of grace, or am I showing up to intensify things because that's what I feel you need? And this is going to be one of those weeks where there's a little less grace and a little more in your face. Hey, that rhymed. I didn't plan that. That was not written in my notes, by the way. So not every episode that I do is going to punch you in the face, right? But this one might hit you a little different than, let's say, the last show where we talked about anxiety, and that required a level of vulnerability that perhaps this topic, not so much. This is more about diving in and sort of making you face something that you may not want to face. So today we are going to get real, and I feel called to tell you the truth about your entitlement. Oh, that's kind of a nasty little word in a way, right? And it's one of those buzzwords as well in today's society. You're so entitled, entitlement. But we're going to talk about entitlement a little bit differently so that you don't feel as triggered, although it may trigger you. I'm not going to lie. At the same time, I want you to think about entitlement a little bit differently, not in the way that we throw it around politically per se, or even on social media, or with complete strangers when we say, this group of people is entitled, this group of people is not. That's not how we're going to talk about entitlement today. I think, though, part of the problem in today's world is that it's convinced you, especially as women, that we are entitled to entitlements. Because we're women, in terms of our gender, we should be given A, B, C, or D. You fill in the blanks as regards to what A, B, and C, D represent to you. There was a time, okay, I'm going to preface with saying that there's a difference between entitlements and human rights. So, of course, there was a time in history when women were not allowed to vote. Men were allowed to vote, but women were not. So having the legal right to vote, that's not an entitlement. That's a human right. So again, big difference. When I'm talking about entitlements, I'm not talking about human rights here, right? It's 2023, and what I want us to get around and get over is this storyline that we've created for ourselves, that we can't win because we're marginalized. And we throw around that word as well, marginalized. We're marginalized because of our gender, right? So the more that you start to fall for this mainstream messaging that somehow we are at a disadvantage, even in a very technologically advanced era, by the way, the worse off we become. So the more that we buy into the storyline, the more that we buy into the messaging and start to think about it, and then think about it so much that we believe it, we now put ourselves at a disadvantage because we start to think we're at a disadvantage. Makes sense, right? The worse off we become. So this messaging, while a lot of it comes from truths or facts, right? And they get spun out of control. And that's what I call the propaganda machine. It turns into kind of a propaganda instead of just information. there's a difference between a piece of information and then propaganda, right? A piece of information is useful. Propaganda, it's like a constant flow of the same messaging that hits you over and over again, so much so that you start to believe this piece of information and you adopt its identity in a way. And so what it's producing is a lot of entitlement, especially around women, entitled chicks. So here's the thing. I could go off about how we as women deserve a lot more support in society. So I don't want you to take this the wrong way, and some of you may, and that is A-okay, because I cannot please everyone. There are people that are going to misinterpret what I am saying. I'm actually very progressive when it comes to having support for women, like a structure of support for women as they go through different phases in their life, like motherhood. I'm so passionate and I'm so irritated that we don't have a certain level of support in society to support women in the workplace as they're making these transitions in their life, as they're going through these seasons. But this episode is not about debating that. It's not about talking about our government. It's not about me, opining about our politics and where we spend all the, revenue that's generated through our tax dollars. This show is not about that, right? But I want to just make sure that you understand I'm very progressive when it comes to supporting women, and that this episode is about entitlements. It's very different than talking about programs that should be in place to support women. But I gotta tell you, I was born in Sweden, right, which is where a very socialist country, right? It's described as a socialist country. And I know a lot of women who not only live in Sweden, but a lot of these countries that have the type of programs and somewhat entitlements that we don't have in this country, in the United States. And I got to tell you, they're not crushing it like a lot of women here in the United States are, because sometimes when we hand out entitlements and we make everything so easy, we lose that human ability to create the resilience that we need and the desire that we need to push through. So sometimes I think too many entitlements, too many handouts, too many programs steals our desire, steals our natural God-given abilities to break through, right? Because we become too comfortable. So today's episode is going to be about how to help you identify whether you're entitled. How do I know if I'm entitled? Great question. That's what we're going to talk about. Listen, I want to preface by saying we all fall into the entitlement trap. Entitlement is a trap that we can all be susceptible to. We're all susceptible to that trap. And maybe there are some areas of your life where you're acting very entitled. Maybe you're acting entitled and you don't realize you're being entitled. And that's the mirror that I'm going to show to you today, because certainly I'm not perfect and I've been entitled in certain areas of my life as well. And I'll talk about that. But what's this word entitled mean anyway? Let's go to my favorite place, the dictionary. So according to the dictionary, entitled means believing oneself to be inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. And here's an example of a sentence, the way that it's used in a sentence. Kids who feel so entitled and think the world will revolve around them. That's it, right there in a nutshell. For you, if we're using the word entitled in a sentence, saying I think like this actually paints the picture very clearly for you. Kids who feel so entitled and think the world will revolve around them. We've all seen and met the kid, or even have kids, and in certain moments they're acting entitled and you're like, oh, that's not very pretty, right? Now imagine adults behaving that way. It's even worse when adults do it, right? Now I've got an episode all about feeling deserving and being deserving. Feeling deserving and thinking you deserve special treatment are two entirely different things. I've seen entitled women and it ain't pretty, okay? It's ugly. Nothing is more ugly than an entitled little brat. I'm going to just keep it real. It's not sexy. And quite frankly, it's childish, which is why I use that sentence. I use the sentence in the dictionary where we're talking about children, right? Children will act entitled because we haven't taught them the differences between what they deserve and what, the special treatment and being entitled, right? And that's a part of parenting and raising them is teaching them how to function in society. But some of us we're like adults, but we're children inside adult bodies, all right? So yes, there's a lot of people out there that are acting childish because typically when it comes to being entitled, it's a childlike behavior. It's natural for kids to act like that because they haven't learned the differences between what entitlement is and how much of it is too much, right? And so a lot of us are walking around as adults, children in adult bodies, like I said. So some people think that just because they tried, I'm going to give you some examples, right, of entitlement here. And bear with me. So some people think that just because they tried something once, that they deserve the results. So you get where I'm going here, right? Just because they took a course in, let's say, mindset or any other type of course, that suddenly that makes them an expert. Have you ever met people like that? Like, I'm an expert in this thing because, well, a lot of people that graduate college, that's an example. So what, you went to school for 4 years, you got your degree in a specific something, or you take an e-course on a specific topic, and all of a sudden you get this inflated ego and think that you're an expert. There's an entitlement attitude to that right there. Okay, that's what I want to point out. Or, you graduate college and all of a sudden you think that you should be paid a lot for XYZ because you happen to put some time into schooling, but you don't have the work experience yet to back it up. So you think you're an expert before you are an expert, and then you want to charge as if you're a master, and you're not. That's having an entitled attitude. Some people think that just because they made a couple sales in their business, for example, let's say that you're a business owner, and you meet a couple of sales and you're like, I made a couple of sales. I did this thing for a short while. Suddenly that makes them an expert and they can just sell everyone on consulting. So a lot of people, they don't wait to become a master before they go and teach the thing that they're talking about. And that drives me nuts. I think it's an entitled attitude to do that. Some people think that just because they helped a business, let's say that you're an employee, and you're working inside a business, that just because you helped that business hit a few big milestones, that somehow you should get more piece of the pie. Some people think that just because they signed up for a fitness program, they should have lost weight in week 1. And by the way, that's a prime example. This has happened before in our company of Superhuman. Some people think that the act of signing up and making the payment entitles them to the result instantly. So you see how I'm using this word entitled, right? Hopefully it's becoming much clearer for you. Some people eat healthy for a week and think, what? Hey, why don't I have the body I desire? I tried this program for 30 days. That program lied to me. I don't have abs yet. Really? My question to you is whether you recognize yourself in any of these scenarios that I just described. Another one is some people pray to God a couple of times and they expect a miracle. Well, I guess God doesn't exist. I prayed and I didn't get what I wanted. I prayed once, I prayed twice, I prayed a couple of times. Maybe I got down on my knees here and there, cried a little bit. Where's my miracle? That's a sense of entitlement as well. It's like putting just a little bit of effort. So my question is, do you recognize yourself in any of these scenarios? Because as I'm talking about them, I recognize myself in some of these scenarios. So of course, the answer is yes for you. If I'm admitting for myself, yeah, you know what? I've been that person, or I've been that person in this situation, then we all are entitled on some level. When we say entitled, we all act entitled on some level. Let's just admit it. The question is, where in our lives are we acting entitled or being entitled? You got to just be real with yourself and admit it.
Thanks for tuning into my show. As the co-owner and COO of Superhuman, I want to invite you to learn more about how we help high-achieving men and women just like you become top performers in their bodies and minds. Book a free call with my team. Go to superhuman.com to get on our schedule now.
Maybe you've been told that it would be easy. Maybe you've bought into the lie that it should be really, really effortless. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be easy and effortless in some circumstances. Sometimes people make it harder on themselves than they need to. And there's such a thing as doing it the smart way instead of the long, painful way, right? And I'm not about that. At the same time, not everything is effortless, especially if you've never tried the thing that you're attempting to do and then expect the result overnight. So you get where I'm going here. You may have been taught that you're all deserving. And like I said, all deserving is very different. You deserve everything and anything that your heart desires as long as you're willing to put in the work, right? We don't get what we want with minimum effort all the time. Some things take less effort than other things, right? How much effort do you actually put in, and how consistent are you? So it's not just about the effort, but how consistent are we with that effort that we put in? If it took you 10 years, would you do it? I'm sure you've heard that question before. If this thing that you want, and the thing is the result, right? If this result that you want, if it took you 10 years, would you do it? And here's the more important question. If it took you 10 years of consistency, would you still do it? There's a difference there, because you could do something kind of, sort of, for 10 years and still not get the result because of the one piece of the formula, which is the consistency of it. So you could do something for 10 years but not be consistent and not get the result, right? So a lot of people answer yes to the first question. They're like, yeah, I do it for 10 years, but like at what amount of intensity and what amount of consistency? That second question is more important. Would you do it consistently for 10 years? And a lot of people are like, nah, I don't know if I'm willing. Let me hit you with some pretty astonishing data, by the way. Let's go to the facts here, because I'm a former news reporter, so I always like to bring stats into this. So check this out. Of all people who start podcasts, 90% of podcasts do not get past episode number 3. Can you believe that? I'm going to read that again, because that even shocked me. Of all the people who start podcasts, 90% of these things do not get past episode number 3. Tress, that's 1.8 million people who quit. Of the 200,000 left, 90% are going to quit after 20 episodes. 90% will quit after 20 episodes. So what does that tell you? Back to my statement. One, these people were not willing to do it for 10 years, that's for sure. But they also weren't willing to be consistent. 3 tries, done. They're out of the game. And for those that stay in the game, 90% later, 20 episodes, nah. And I totally get it. This is actually episode number 51. I've made it past 50, and I'm certainly not average, right? According to the data. Too many of you do not have the stamina. That's what it is. You don't have the stamina. You don't have the patience. You don't want to play the long game. You want it now. You want it instantly. You are acting entitled. And you are being an entitled little prick by thinking that way. Right? I record a couple of episodes. Why am I not exploding yet? Why don't I have all the organic traffic yet? Seriously, it's going to take way more than that to stand out, to stand the test of time. This game is really about standing the test of time. When I talk about the game, I'm talking about the game of life, standing the test of time. And I've felt this way many times. Let's just talk about the podcast for a second, right? Every week I have to go in with a mentality, okay, it's like working out, being consistent with the action, right? A lot of times it's inconvenient to record the podcast, even though I love to do it. Just because you love something doesn't mean that you want to do it consistently all the time. I mean, we need to take the allure a little bit out of winning. Feels good to win when you're in the mood, but what about when you're not in the mood? And our moods fluctuate, right? Our emotions oscillate. So not every day are we on a high, and when we're on a high and we're having a happy day and our emotional state is amazing, go to record the podcast episode, and of course it feels easy and effortless, but what about the times when you get punched in the face by life, or you've got a busy schedule, or just there's obstacles, there's challenges in the way? Then you don't really feel like going to record the podcast. There's a million reasons and excuses as to why you shouldn't show up. And by the way, when this goes out, this is just a few days after the Super Bowl, and the halftime show was done by Rihanna. And what do you know? Pregnant and doing the halftime show. I was like, man, now we're officially out of excuses, especially as women, right? So people who win the game and people who are not entitled are showing up even when they don't feel like it, essentially, right? And they're being consistent about it. Here's some more stats. One study found that up to 73% of people who set fitness resolutions end up quitting before they hit their targets. So 73% of people don't ever reach their fitness goals, ever. They just, they stop before they hit their target. And you know why? A lot of times it's because we're setting unrealistic goals here. Really unrealistic. And you know why you set unrealistic goals? 2 reasons, I think anyway. It's just an opinion. Maybe you're lazy and you're entitled. This just goes back to the podcast or even social media. You post a couple of times and think you should be able to get clients. You post a couple of times and think that your audience should just grow overnight. That's kind of an entitled attitude to have, right? And you can't afford to have an entitled attitude, especially if your growth mindset, if you own a business or you're a high-performing individual, you can't afford to have an entitled attitude because you'll lose like that. Let's talk about money because this is real nice and triggering. There are about 22 million millionaires in the United States. 8.8% of U.S. adults are millionaires. 33% of U.S. millionaires are women. Hello. Having 1 million puts you in the top 10% of wealth in the U.S. Okay, can we just stop right there? Women be stacking chips. 33% of millionaires are women. Going back to what I said at the beginning of this episode, are we really that marginalized if 33% of millionaires are women? It's a pretty good percentage, wouldn't you say? Want it to be higher? Let's make it higher. Let's do it. Maybe it'll be more than men someday. I think we're quite on our way, but it's not about more or less. It's just, that's a pretty good percentage right there, I think, right? Someone was actually telling me the other day that, you know what, I don't think there's that many boss women as there are comparative to boss men. And that may be true on the surface. But let's look at the data. Let's look at the stats. Let's look at the facts, because then you couldn't be more wrong. The U.S. has 12.3 million women-owned businesses. U.S. women-owned businesses generate $1.8 trillion a year. 40% of U.S. businesses are women-owned. I think we're naturally born entrepreneurs. Just the way that we are, or the way that we show up as moms, I mean, we've got the capabilities and ability to be entrepreneurial, because being an entrepreneur is all about creation. And who else knows how to better create than women? Because we're literally like the portals to life. We create life inside our bodies. So naturally, we would be amazing at entrepreneurship. I think we have the gifting of that, because entrepreneurship in business is all about building and growth and giving birth, right? So 40% of U.S. businesses are women-owned. So don't give me that crap that women are marginalized. Women can't be high earners. It's just not true, unless it's a belief that you choose to adopt, and then so it becomes. So I think I've made my point. I want you to look at the different areas of your life. I want you to look at the area of your home, your business, your body, your faith. Where are you being entitled? Think of our home. Think of our marriage, our relationships. We expect Prince Charming, but how much effort do we actually put into our men, ladies? How much effort do men put into their women? Like you just act like you're going to have a perfect marriage because you had a wedding. And John and I have been there before. My husband and I, we've been there before. It's like you walk down the aisle, you spend all this freaking money on a wedding, you say your vows, and you're, white picket fence, perfect marriage. No, then the real work begins. And it's not just a little bit of effort. It's a lot of bit of effort. And what? Consistently. That's going to produce the result that you're desiring, which is this amazing marriage. It's going to take effort from both ends, of course, and a lot of consistent effort. Who knew? Nobody told us. We're just now figuring this out, right? So what I want you to do is identify what area of your life are you being the most entitled? Is it in your business, your body, your faith, your marriage, your home, right? Tell me where it is. Maybe it's not your business, right? Maybe it's your body. Maybe it's your faith. Whatever this area is as I'm mentioning it, it's going to hit you a little different. It's going to feel a little painful when I say, hey, where are you being entitled? Are you being entitled in your marriage? If you go, like you get that little inner voice like, oh, that hit me. Probably so, right? This is an area that you want to look at. Either way, if that area is suffering, it's either because you've got an unrealistic expectation and you live in a la-la land, right? Or you're entitled. I mean, the two go hand in hand, right? And entitled to results that you really haven't put any effort into. So how could I expect? What an unrealistic expectation to have the body I desire, but I don't what? Work out, I don't eat right. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? We're living in la-la land. Or what a ridiculous and unrealistic expectation to have of our husbands or our wives, for them to show up perfectly for us when we're not putting any effort into that area. So you see where I'm going here. It's 100% accountability. So you know what? If you haven't reached some of the goals in your life, I want you to have that reality check. I want to give you that reality check because at the end of the day, it takes what it takes. And that's what I've learned. It takes what it takes. Your results are going to tell you where you're entitled. So not just the feeling, like I just said, look at those different categories in terms of your life and look at the results. And if the results are something that you don't like, then that tells you that's an area that you may be acting entitled in. When you're not getting what you want, when you get past throwing that tantrum, because we all throw the tantrum when we're not getting what we want, it's time to put our big girl panties on, right? And we got to ask ourselves, where am I being entitled? And how do I create a plan of accountability to get me the results that I desire? Because it's going to take what it takes. That's all I can tell you. And sometimes some areas in our life takes more than other areas of our life. It is not fair. I get it. You're like, why is this happening for someone else a lot faster and a lot easier? Don't do the comparison thing, but I get it. So you start throwing that tantrum and you start feeling entitled. You don't know about their life. You don't know how long they've been working at that. You don't know how consistent they've been. Don't be paying attention to that. Pay attention to yourself. We are spending way too much paying attention to other people. And that's what social media has done to us. It's like, shut it off. And don't even pay attention to me. Like, you can't do that because you don't know. There's no amount of footage, no amount of content that I could possibly produce for you to understand the level of work and consistency that I do behind the scenes to get the results that I'm experiencing right now. There's just no level of transparency that I could possibly give you for you to understand unless you were just me, right? And so sometimes we just we judge a lot as a result of that. You don't know what you don't know, so pay attention to yourself, right? It takes what it takes. And I'm not saying that it has to be painful. I'm just saying results require a process that you have to stick to and consistently. So that's it. Results require a process and a level of accountability and a level of consistency. And I think that's why you got to have a plan. And that's why I'm a big fan of having a coach. I've got a business consultant. Just because I know what I know about business doesn't mean that I don't need to learn more, right? And the question that it's going to come down to at the end of the day, besides desire, is are you willing? Yeah, do you have the desire for that change? Because it takes what it takes, right? So I want to know what you think about this, because I know I came at you and I didn't use a lot of grace. I more came with that intensity, right? But I think you understand what I'm saying here, right? I want to know, what area of your life do you think you're acting entitled or being entitled about? And just have that honest conversation with yourself. Hit me up in my direct messages on Instagram. And, what area of your life are you being entitled about? I want to hear from you. I'll just quickly take a minute here and talk about what areas in my life I've been entitled about, or maybe am being entitled about right now. There used to be a time that I was acting very entitled about the level of results that I was getting when it came to the body that I desired. Sometimes we lie to ourselves and we lie to others because we don't want to admit it. It's like, hey, I don't have abs. If I want abs, am I sticking with a program? Am I hitting my macros? And am I doing it consistently? Am I training in a way that strengthens my core? I'm just using that as an example, right? And if the answer is no, and not really, then the reality is that I'm acting entitled to those results, right? I'm acting entitled and throwing a tantrum. So I've done that before, certainly in my life, right? Other areas of my life that I've acted entitled about, business. Hey, even at this level, it's like, I want this and I want that. But am I behaving in a way that gives me the result that I desired? Am I doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing to be at that level, to have that level? And the answer is no. So you throw your tantrum, you're like, oh, I'm so mad, I'm so mad. Okay, am I willing? And am I willing to dedicate however long it takes? Am I willing to be patient? Am I willing to commit to the process? Am I willing to just not quit? Instead of quitting, a lot of us just quit. Instead of quitting, just rest. Take a break. Take a week off. But a lot of us just quit. We just completely stop. And you don't have to stop. And I think a lot of people stop and they quit because they're so hard on themselves. Like it didn't go perfectly 1 week or 2 weeks. So you just decide to just throw it in the trash can and throw the towel in because you're expecting a level of perfection and it's impossible to be perfect, right? You're having those unrealistic goals even out of yourself. So you take that pressure off and focus on the process and focus on consistency. It doesn't need to be perfect 100% of the time. Where else have I been entitled in my life? Hey, I'm expecting miracles from God in my life, but here's something that I've had to face. Have I just prayed once, or do I consistently show up and have the conversation with God? Do I consistently pray? Do I consistently go to church? Do I consistently listen to worship music? Do I consistently engage with my spiritual sisters, my sisters in Christ? Do I spiritually engage in the act of cultivating faith in my life? If I'm being really honest with myself, no. But then how am I expecting a miracle from God? Do you see where I'm going with this? Yeah, it's easy to call you out. It's not so easy when you get called out too. So I completely understand. So going back to that question, where are you acting entitled? Because acting is just a behavior and you can change your behavior if you're aware of it. Where am I being completely entitled? And it's just showing you the mirror. That's all I'm doing. Where am I being entitled when it comes to my home? Where am I being entitled when it comes to my business or my career? Where am I being entitled when it comes to my marriage? Where am I being entitled when it comes to my physical health, my mental health? Like, am I actually putting effort in these areas? And what kind of effort am I putting in? Am I being consistent about that effort? If the answer is no, then you might have an entitlement issue. If you're loving this show, connect with me on Instagram, share this episode, and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. Thanks for listening.